All right, let's go ahead and get started. First, I just want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today for another installment of our research webinar series hosted by our team here at the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute, or MVLRI. The goal of MVLRI is to expand Michigan's capacity to support new learning models, engage in active research to inform new policies in online and blended learning, and strengthen the state's infrastructures for sharing best practices. MVLRI is a division of Michigan Virtual, a nonprofit organization whose mission is advancing K-12 education through digital learning, research, innovation, policy, and partnerships. Michigan Virtual's efforts include providing online courses to K-12 students across Michigan and the United States, as well as providing a variety of professional learning opportunities for educators focused on innovative educational practices such as blended learning, providing resources, products, and services to personalize learning options for their students, and improve student achievement. Today, we are fortunate to have with us Dr. Phoebe Valentine, a full-time high school mathematics teacher and a part-time instructor at Northern Illinois University. Her research interests include blended learning in the traditional K-12 setting. As a K-12 public educator, she is able to see the work being done in the trenches as blended learning grows in the traditional public school sector. She is active in local K-12 professional development, especially within her own school district, providing frequent training and participating in the planning of professional development as teachers prepare to provide blended learning opportunities. The research she will talk about today focuses on self-paced blended learning of mathematics for high-ability middle school students. This is also her second publication on this topic. With that, we'd like to hand it over to Phoebe to get us started. Thank you, Dr. Ballantyne.
Thank you very much. All right, so as Justin said, this presentation is on attitudes and achievement in a self-paced blended setting. This is based on a related article that was just published in the Journal of Online Learning Research, Attitudes and Achievement in a Self-Paced Blended Mathematics course. And this was written by myself and Dr. Mary Alice Varga, and you can find it here. And there was also a prior article looking at change in achievement and change in attitudes with the same population and in the same setting. And this was the effects of self-paced blended learning of mathematics, and it was published in the Journal of Computers in Mathematics and Science Teaching. And that's another AACE publication. So that can be found here. There has been a big growth shift lately. We've seen a lot of growth in online learning in the past decade or two. But now this shift in growth is what we're seeing is that in public K-12 schools, suddenly there's a lot of growth toward blended learning. A lot more traditional classrooms and teachers are starting to implement this. So it's becoming a really big area of growth. As that happens, it's important for us to step back and ask ourselves which students are best suited to this environment. We do a lot of looking at what's the most effective way of doing this, but we don't always look at which students are going to be the most successful in these environments. Research has shown that attitudes are critical for learning mathematics, learning all subjects, but especially mathematics. So the purpose of this study was to look at the relationship between achievement and attitudes, specifically in this self-paced blended math class, and looking at it for high ability middle school students. The research questions were looking at what is the relationship between achievement growth during this course and high ability middle school students' attitudes toward mathematics, hypothesizing that there would be a statistically significant correlation between achievement growth and attitudes. And then what is the relationship between achievement growth and specific attitudes, those attitudes being value of mathematics, motivation, enjoyment of mathematics, and self-confidence. Again, hypothesizing that there would be a statistically significant correlation between achievement growth and each of these individual attitudinal factors. The theoretical framework for this study was self-efficacy theory, which is about students' perceptions of their own abilities. That's what their self-efficacy is. It's formed through student successes and failures, and A student who has a high self-efficacy believes that their successes are based on their effort, whereas a student who has lower self-efficacy believes that it's based on their ability. They don't think that they can change their abilities and become better at something. So high self-efficacy is generally going to correlate to a student being more successful. Self-efficacy can also be thought of as self-confidence, and middle school students are an especially important population to consider when we're thinking about self-efficacy, because this age group can often experience a decline in self-efficacy. Just a little bit about online learning for gifted or high ability students. When we're looking at the reasons districts offer online courses, so these are districts that are offering online courses, what's their reason that they do it? Some of them, 62%, do have credit recovery courses. So the majority offer some sort of credit recovery. 47% are offering dual enrollment college courses this way. And then 29% are offering advanced placement courses. Acceleration has long been considered the best practice for gifted or high ability students. But when we're looking at rural districts or small school districts or school districts with less finances, small enrollments can make it really hard to offer courses. When you have 3 students that want to take a specific course, it's just not always possible. So that's where online learning can represent a really great opportunity to offer more acceleration and to offer more courses. Online learning can be the provider of these supplemental courses. The effectiveness of online learning, there's a lot of information on this. A lot of it, people have seen different results, but in general, students perform similarly in online and face-to-face courses. This is true of undergraduates, of high school students, and of middle school students. Some of the common criticisms of online learning, though, are that it's easier and lower quality. Students tend to be less successful in online mathematics courses. Students might have low motivation in online courses. People say that there might be isolation for students or a lack of socialization, less interaction with their instructor. And that's where some believe that blended learning can alleviate some of these concerns, can give students more interaction and help improve motivation and increase success. As far as blended learning of mathematics, the goal of blended learning overall is to combine the advantages of online learning and face-to-face learning. Some of the online components that are benefits would be trying to individualize learning and providing more opportunities for students to be successful. And then with the face-to-face components, they're able to offer more collaboration and interaction with students, with each other, as well as with the instructor. When you're comparing the effectiveness to traditional learning, there are mixed results. Our prior study found no significant difference in students' change in achievement growth. Other studies have found that blended learning is more effective with middle school students with disabilities, or that it's more effective with college students in remedial math. But there are so many factors that can be involved when you're looking at the effectiveness of a course, the instructor, the curriculum. There are so many things that it's really difficult to determine what's more effective, which is why now we can kind of move on to looking at what are the characteristics of the most successful students. Who in particular will this benefit, and who can we recommend this for? Middle school students often have negative attitudes toward mathematics. Their attitudes improve during a self-paced blended course. That was something that was found in our previous study. And there are a lot of different factors that can affect their performance. Boredom and enjoyment affect math performance, motivation. Students with a higher self-efficacy have a stronger math performance. And there are also strong links among all of these different attitudinal factors. Students who enjoy math more have higher motivation. Students who have higher self-efficacy might be more motivated. So it's important to look at all of these factors together. Now, what's the need for this study? What are some gaps in the attitudes research that currently exists? First of all, with self-paced blended learning, the research that compares attitudes and achievement to each other, a lot of it focused on traditional courses or fully online courses. There isn't a lot with blended courses. For high ability middle school students in particular, being a group we want to look at, the research that's been done is oftentimes focused on other ages, like undergraduates or high school students or elementary students, and none of those being high ability either. But then those studies that have focused on middle school level have looked at either regular education students or students outside of the US. Additionally, when we're looking at some of these studies that compared attitudes and achievement, these studies used final grades as their achievement measure. So this can obviously be different with many factors, like if a teacher, depending on the different teacher, maybe they have a different final grade. Depending on the curriculum, they might have a different final grade. It's really difficult to have strong reliability and validity when you're looking at a final grade. So this current study is not only using a measure that has proven validity and reliability, but it's also using growth on that single measure versus just looking at student scores. It's looking at the difference between their starting score and their ending score. The setting for this study was a middle school in a small suburb of the Midwestern United States. And it's looking at self-paced blended mathematics course, a specific course for accelerated students. This was a pilot program at this middle school. The demographics of the students, pretty similar male to female ratio, 53.8% male students and 46.2% female students. The ethnicities, it was predominantly Caucasian with 92.3%. However, as I'll talk about later, that's fairly representative of the overall gifted population, and it is representative of the town that this was, the study was conducted in. And 3.8% Asian, 3.8% biracial or multiracial. The students were 50-50 on being 13 and 14 years old. This was a group of 8th graders. A couple additional demographics. 2 of the students, 7.7%, were on free and reduced lunch. There were not any English language learners in the group, and there was 1 student with an individualized education plan. A little about the context of the course. There were 2 classes with 2 different instructors. They used a web-based curriculum called Accelerated Math. The goal of the course was to individualize the rate of instruction for students. The instructional strategies they used, there was independent work, which included sample problems and instructional videos that students would work on inside or outside of class. Assessments were quizzes and tests that they would work on in class. So a student would start with a particular objective, and then they had to do the sample problems or watch the instructional videos that corresponded. And then once they got through a certain number, then they would take a quiz. Once they got through a certain number of those, they would of quizzes and objectives, they would take a test. And then this program would cycle students back. So they, in order to actually have met an objective, they had to have passed it with the quiz and then the test, and then it would come back in a test additional times as well. So students kept saying the same things over and over. And then the last instructional strategy was work at home, which students were required to complete 120 minutes per week of work. Now, what students actually did varied widely. Most students did the 120 minutes, but there were several students that would come back after a weekend and have a large amount of work done, and they were really motivated in that regard, and they were able to get through more than 1 full class. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but some students were able to get a lot accomplished, and most of that was because they put in a lot of time and work at home because they were motivated to finish more than 1 course. There was also group work for instructional strategies. Some of this was direct instruction to a small group of students that might be on the same objective. Students worked in small groups together on certain objectives as well. And then the teacher also would provide intervention or remediation. If a student was not passing a quiz or not passing a test, they would work potentially even one-on-one with that teacher. The students were either in Algebra 1 or Geometry. This course was for 8th grade students. The majority of the 8th grade students in this class were taking Algebra 1. However, in years past, students who were double accelerated, they took Algebra 1 7th grade and then Geometry in 8th grade, they would be bused to the high school because there was such a small number of them. There were maybe 3 to 4 students most years. So this particular year, students were able to stay in the classroom with the other students. They were simply working on a different course in this self-paced blended curriculum. Some students, some of them being Algebra 1 students and some of them being Geometry students, completed 2 full math courses during this 1-year time frame. The instruments that were used for this study, first was the MAP test, the Measures of Academic Progress mathematics test, and it was measuring achievement growth. It looked at 4 different domains: operational and algebraic thinking, the real and complex number system, geometry, and statistics and probability. The scores fell into 6 different ranges. You can see they're approximately groups of 10, so they range from about 201 to over 250. It's a computerized adaptive test, so as a student gets a question correct, they get a more difficult question. If a student misses a question, they get an easier question. And there were 50 items. The marginal reliabilities for this assessment are very high, with 0.94 or greater, with studies of over 25,000 participants. The retest reliabilities were also high, between 0.83 and 0.94 for fall to spring administrations, again with a really high number of participants, over 10,000. The concurrent validity was done with the ISAT, and you can see that was done in 2004, so it's a little bit dated. Now they're using different testing, but that was at the time the test that was being used. And there was high concurrent validity with that, with a score of 0.87 for almost 1,000 participants. And then finally, there's proven construct validity on this instrument as well. The purpose of using this instrument was to determine students' achievement growth. The test was administered 2 times. It was administered at the beginning of the course in September 2014, and then at the end of the course in May 2015. The scores were subtracted then, the initial score minus, or the ending score, sorry, minus the initial score, to determine the achievement growth during the course of the class. The next instrument that was used was the ATMI, the Attitudes Toward Mathematics Inventory. And this measures students' attitudes toward mathematics. It contains 40 items that are all statements about students' attitudes, and the responses vary. They're giving their level of agreement on a 5-point Likert scale, with 1 being strongly agree and 1 being strongly disagree to 5 being strongly agree. The 4 attitudinal factors we mentioned earlier: first, value, and an example of a statement for that would be mathematics is a very worthwhile subject. Motivation, one of the statements for that is I want to develop my mathematical skills. Enjoyment, an example of a statement with that is I get a great deal of satisfaction out of solving a mathematics problem. And then finally, self-confidence or self-efficacy. An example there is mathematics does not scare me at all. Now, some of these statements were reversed, and so those scores were reversed when they were put into SPSS. The reliability of this instrument was very high overall in previous studies, 0.97, and then also high for each factor: value 0.86, motivation 0.89, enjoyment 0.88, and self-confidence 0.95. There's also demonstrated content and construct validity on this instrument. The purpose of using this instrument was to determine students' attitudes toward mathematics after the course, and this instrument was administered in May 2015 at the end of the course. Now a little bit of just the descriptive statistics for these instruments. You can see here for achievement growth, first of all, you can see that the number of students is a little bit different, and that's because the MAP scores were required by the school anyway, so they did a really good job of making sure students took the assessment even if they were absent. But as far as the attitude survey, that didn't work out quite as well with the teachers in these courses getting students to take it. But the achievement growth mean is 8, which when you're looking at the possible scores is pretty significant, but the standard deviation is also pretty high here as well. The attitude scores, most attitudes were fairly high, a 4 being they agree with those statements. And enjoyment was the lowest and value was the highest. The internal consistency for the ATMI, we ran Chromebox Alpha for that as well, and it showed a very high level of reliability for the instrument, specifically within our study, with a score of 0.96. Now, as far as attitudes and achievement, to answer our research questions, the goal was to assess the relationship between achievement growth and attitudes. The inferential statistics that were conducted to determine this was Spearman's rank order correlation, due to determining the relationship between two numerical values, and also one of them being interval data. So these are the results of that. I put in red and bold some of the statistically significant findings, and you can see that they all ended up being statistically significant. The relationship between achievement growths and attitudes toward mathematics, the correlation between achievement growth and value, achievement growth and motivation, enjoyment, and self-confidence. So again, as far as the results, the null hypothesis was rejected. There are statistically significant correlations between students' overall attitudes and their achievement growth in the course. There were statistically significant correlations between students' value of mathematics and achievement growth, between their motivation and achievement growth, their enjoyment of mathematics and achievement growth, and their self-confidence in achievement growth. Now, the relationship among attitudes was also observed. The goal here being to assess the relationship between and among the different attitudes. And again, Spearman's rank order correlation was used for this. And again, you can see here that all of those correlations were significant. Students' overall attitudes to each of the different attitudinal factors, value, motivation, enjoyment, and self-confidence, and then between each of them as well, value and motivation, enjoyment and value, and so on. Again, those results being statistically significant correlations between and among all attitudes. So what we found here was a significant correlation between the attitudes students have toward mathematics and the achievement growth they see in a course. Students with positive attitudes toward math may be better suited to self-paced blended learning. And additionally, those students who experience greater achievement growth may have better attitudes toward mathematics at the end of the course. Maybe they're seeing the achievement that they get out of this. Maybe self-pacing is helping them to see the success that they're having, and they're increasing in confidence in their abilities. There were also a significant correlation among attitudes. So it's possible that improving some attitudes may help to improve other attitudes. And this could in turn help improve student achievement. Some of the limitations to this study were the sample size. It was a small sample size. Additionally, the lack of diversity. This does reflect the U.S. gifted population. However, that's an issue that we want to address. That's something that we want to look at potentially in a future study. Why does the gifted population look like this? What can we do to help improve that diversity? And the curriculum and instructors here could have certainly been variables that affected these relationships and students' performance. So some of the implications for practice here. First of all, students with positive attitudes toward learning may be especially well suited to the self-paced blended learning environment. So those students who have high self-confidence, they have the motivation, maybe we should be putting them in self-paced blended courses. Again, consider self-paced blended learning for high ability students, especially those with high math self-efficacy. If a student really feels confident in it, they might not only be successful in the course, but potentially with the self-pacing aspect, they may get further along and end up learning more. Teachers can also work to improve students' self-efficacy and enjoyment of mathematics. Since attitudes and achievement are related, if teachers can look for strategies, research-based strategies that will help student self-efficacy and that will help improve students' enjoyment, those can then have effects on other attitudinal factors and potentially on students' achievement. Self-pacing gives the opportunity to achieve significant achievement growth. As we saw in this course with self-pacing, students were completing 2 full years of mathematics. Not only would it not be possible for students to get to specific courses just based on the number of students enrolled, but they also wouldn't be able to get through as much material. So self-pacing can give students the ability to get through as much as they're ready for, and it can give students the ability to potentially take courses that might not otherwise be offered simply because of the number of students. Teachers can consider integrating self-paced components into math classes using blended learning, especially for high ability students. So obviously it's not always possible to have an entire school go to self-pacing or to make some changes to the curriculum. Teachers only have so much control over their own classroom. But if they can start implementing some of their own self-pacing, they could help students maybe not to get to new material, but to get to some enrichment things or to start thinking about the same topics on a deeper level. And then finally, when the number of students limits course offerings, self-pacing and/or blended or online learning should be considered. If students are wanting to take a course that isn't being offered, or if students are, if there's just not enough students financially to do that, then these options should be looked into. And then here are my references. So does anyone have any questions? I was trying to look through the chat as we went, but I don't think that there was anything. Yes.
I should mention that our audience currently does not have microphone rights, but if you would like to use the mic to speak, please feel free to indicate that in the chat or by using one of the commands in the room, and I'd be happy to enable your mic if you'd like to speak over audio.
Hello.
Hi, Christine. We can hear you.
Hi, great. I'm sorry, I was totally paying attention, but I was getting a lot of information on the side from my work. But we're just currently, we use, I guess in Canada, we use blended to me has so many meanings. And we don't necessarily refer to blended as just a face-to-face and online model. We currently are developing online models that we consider hybrid or blended, where we are blending asynchronous and synchronous. Just explain, just sorry, I was paying attention, Dr. Ballantyne, but so the kids who are in they're face-to-face in these math classes, but they have the option of doing accelerated or enrichment activities online. Is that the self-paced piece?
The way that this particular program worked was that students they were in this, the curriculum is self-paced. So students would, I mean, sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Oh, all better. So students would start with the same objective, assuming that they were all in Algebra 1. Every Algebra 1 student would start with the first Algebra 1 objective. And then the geometry students would start with the first geometry objective. But everything, for the most part, even within the classroom, it was done on a computer. I think you bring up a really great point in that blended can mean so many different things. There are so many different blends, so to speak. This one, students were on a computer a good amount of the time because that's where their curriculum was. It was not in a textbook, it was on the computer. If students didn't have computer access at home, things could be printed out, but for the most part, it was on the computer. So then what would happen is students would get through the objectives at different rates. So maybe one student has gotten through 3 objectives this week, and maybe another student got through 10. Part of this is how long it's taking them in class, and part of this is how much they're working on at home. So when we're talking about the blended part here, it's the fact that they're still coming into class 5 days a week for, I think it was, their schedule was around 43 minutes. I'm sorry, I don't have a 100% answer on that, but the students were still coming into class 5 days a week for this course. They were still interacting with other students, interacting with their instructor at specific times, but a lot of it was on the computer and independent. Yes. Yes, that's what we meant by self-paced.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I was kind of confused there for a minute because the kids they're still in the same classroom every day. So the pacing is there in the sense that they're in a traditional brick and mortar every day, but it's the objectives that they reach at a different speed. That's the self-pacing.
They're all going to class every day, but what they get through, the specific content that they're looking at, is all based on their own abilities. The content that they're learning is all completely individualized. Welcome. Thank you for your question. Did anyone else have questions that they wanted to ask?
I had a comment to make. We've been developing and designing synchronous online courses for, I'd say, upper, not middle school, but higher high school for years. And we're just currently designing a model that we're calling self-paced, not completely self-paced, but I find the implications of who should be involved in these courses is interesting, and it's good. It's great feedback for me to pass along to my colleagues that learn. So thank you.
I'm really glad to hear that.
So, Dr. Ballantyne, you mentioned a couple potential areas for further study. Are there any other kinds of different study designs that you're looking at with regard to blended learning in the future?
As far as with self-paced blended learning, and myself in particular, or do you mean just suggestions for other people of research?
I guess I was asking the question for you in particular, but I guess the floor would be open for either of those.
As far as myself, I actually just collected some data with within the K-12 context about blended learning, about professional development for teachers implementing blended learning within a K-12 public school setting. So and this was something I just presented on virtually at site, but we were looking at creating Google cohorts. So the school district that I was looking at implemented Google for Educators, which is kind of a rudimentary learning management system, but there are a lot of different tools and ways to implement blended learning. And then the way that the professional development was run was using a cohort model. So some of those teachers who felt especially comfortable or confident with the Google tools that we were using would run different cohorts. And then some of the research is just looking at how teachers benefited from that, how that affected their implementation, how that affected their confidence. So kind of shifting the focus over to this really largely growing group of people that are implementing blended learning, but in a normal K-12 context without the self-pacing, without as many online components, because I think this is becoming very widely used and not all teachers are necessarily prepared to implement it. So I think it's important to have some research there.
Great, thank you for that. We do have plenty of time for more questions, so if anyone has any other questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat window or indicate that you'd like to use your audio as well.
I'm not sure about access to the presentation. I could certainly send it to anyone who would be interested, but maybe Justin could answer that. And yes, I'd be happy to answer your question in it.
So Christine, just really quickly, we will be hosting the recording of this presentation on our YouTube channel. And I guess if it would be okay with Dr. Ballantyne, I'd be happy to send the slide deck as well, but we would want to make sure that she would like to share that out as well.
And sorry about that. I hope that I allowed the proper permissions there. My question is, as you consider your research, Dr. Ballantyne, what implications do you think this has for both program design, like if you have an accelerated blended program, as well as for course design? Like if someone is thinking about the best way to deliver the information, the content that the students have, can you kind of speak to what implications might be, and your slide was wonderful, the implications for practice, but specifically that course design piece and the program design piece?
That's a great question. As far as program design, I think that it's important. I mean, the purpose of this research was really to look at the students this is best suited for, and not that we can prove that this isn't well suited for particular students, but when program designers are designing these programs, I think looking at which students have this higher motivation, which students have the higher self-efficacy, and looking for self-pacing and or blended components for those type of programs. So especially with high ability students, since that was the population with this study, I would say looking at how to implement some self-pacing into a math class with program design. I've seen some things where teachers will have groups kind of self-pace. You know, they come in with a particular objective that they're going to all look at, but the teacher does the videos and things at home, and then they can, in class, potentially watch them if they haven't yet, or work on some more things together, work on some enrichment activities, or if after watching this video they're still not understanding it, they can get more time and help with that teacher. As far as course design, I think it can be difficult to implement self-pacing if the curriculum is not designed for that, and there's a lot of front-loaded work with that. But if the teachers are willing to put in the time, setting some of this up to be self-paced or to have some self-pacing options can be really beneficial to students. And maybe students are still taking the same quiz and the same test on the same day, but maybe just as they're learning these objectives, they can do it somewhat at their own speed. And then if one student finishes in 15 minutes out of the 50-minute course, then they have an enrichment activity that they're doing where they can really get those higher order thinking skills in and understand this at a deeper level. And maybe some other students are going to take the full 50-minute period to understand this topic, but it also frees up the teacher to have some time to individualize instruction and work more one-on-one with those students that are struggling. Selecting curriculum that are out there, you mean?
No, I meant more that the idea is that if that particular attitude, that positive attitude, and being pretty confident that you can do this, that those things are important to being successful in the online blended program.
In this particular situation, those students that were that had higher self-efficacy, those high ability students in particular, well, this just looking at high ability students, but with the self-paced blended learning, they seemed to have higher achievement. And maybe as far as selecting a program, maybe thinking of it as students selecting it. I mean, that could be another option as well. If a self-paced blended program is offered, or even a self-paced online program, but students can elect to participate, then you might get some of those students with the high motivation and high self-efficacy. Okay, that's what you meant. Yeah, so that might be a way to really get those students with the positive attitudes, and then you can kind of let those high flyers fly and really get through, learn more, basically, getting the opportunity to learn more and get through more content. Welcome. In this particular case, it was the Accelerated Math Live curriculum. That's who was producing the online component. But there are, I mean, it's hard to say, because as we were talking about with the blended component being so varied, sometimes I've seen, not in this particular study, but sometimes I've seen teachers creating their own content. Other times they're using content they're finding online. It's not, the teachers were not creating this. It was videos that were created. As far as the online components, the sample problems, the videos, all of that was part of the Accelerated Math Live curriculum. So any of it that was on the computer was Accelerated Math Live. The teachers did the direct instruction in class, the group work. They did some enrichment activities. And so I think that's one important piece to keep in mind, is that this is potentially not easier to implement overall, but easier to implement for the teachers if it's an existing curriculum. However, that doesn't mean that that's the best curriculum, and that doesn't mean that that's the most important piece to have. I think it is a lot of work for teachers to create things on the front end to implement a really good blended curriculum, but if you have a big department or a lot of teachers working together, it's possible that they could create something better. That's something that we would need to research too. Yes, it frees up time for the teachers to work with students individually. And this can happen whether the teachers created the curriculum or not, but obviously a lot more outside time would be needed if the teachers created the curriculum. But in this particular case, that was the majority of the teacher's time, would be creating these enrichment activities or meeting one-on-one with students, checking in with students, explaining concepts to those ones that were moving through things a little slower. They were constantly monitoring students' progress so they could see who's taking too long to get through something. And there were actually, it would red flag students for the teacher once they failed something or failed a certain number of objectives. The teacher got like a red flag type of thing, and then the student couldn't move on until they met with the teacher. So they would go and work one-on-one with the teacher to get extra help with that particular topic or with it could be more than one objective that they were working on, but it would automatically expect them to work with the teacher in that case, and then the teacher could be monitoring everyone overall. So even those students who were going quickly or going above and beyond could have some time to work with the teacher or with a small group as well. Accelerated math. You're welcome. And just a caveat, I mean, this study certainly wasn't looking at the efficiency of this program, how good or how bad this program was. It was focused on how students' attitudes and achievement correlated, and this program could certainly be a factor in the results that were found, which was why I discussed that in the limitation section, but this was the particular curriculum that they happen to use in this program. You're welcome. Does anyone else have any other questions? Yes, I understand.
Okay, well, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. We do want to once again thank Dr. Phoebe Valentine, sorry, for presenting for us today and walking us through her research, and we really, really appreciate that. We do just want to point out a couple different MVLRI initiatives before we wrap up. We do have a podcast series and a guest blogger program that are both available as platforms for people to come on and share about the work that they're doing in the area of online and blended learning. So kind of two parallel initiatives to this webinar platform as well. So if you'd like to check those out, we encourage you to do so at our website, mvlri.org. You can check out our podcast, which is called Virtual Viewpoints. You can check out all of our previous blog posts and learn more about being able to become a guest or being able to guest blog for us as well. We would greatly appreciate that. Lastly, just a few contacts for us in case you'd like to keep up with the work that we're doing. You can email us at mvlri@michiganvirtual.org. You can sign up for our mailing list, which is linked there as well. You can follow us on a number of different social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Again, the recording of this webinar will be hosted on our YouTube channel, which will likely be up in the next day or two at youtube.com/mvlri1. And you can check out all of our upcoming webinars at our website at mvlri.org to see the great showcases that we have of all of the research being done in our field. So once again, we want to thank Dr. Ballantyne for presenting for us today. We want to thank everyone for coming, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Take care.